Is there like an agenda for each one and everything in the dossier you sent?
Well, there's supposed to be, you know, you're not the only one that let me down today. Weiser did not do the question prompt unless I missed something. Oh, maybe I did miss something. Maybe I shouldn't throw stones until I check.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he did do it. Dang it.
He's
I knew
he's a
he
guy
would.
on top of his shit, you know?
Yeah, he always is. The thing that my mistake was I didn't get an alert because it's a rolling it's a
Alright.
rolling post.
I'm gonna say that's what happened to me too.
So it was just like I blew it. You know what though? I want to change that. Wiser, you did everything you're supposed to do.
Call an audible.
I'm gonna call an audible only because Jared's not here and you are here.
Yeah.
I got an idea. Let's go get any kind of random cafe P&L. So here's where it's kind of gonna be on the fly. So we've got this big bank of questions. Like a lot of people write in, and we have all these really specific questions. So one of the things that keeps popping up over and over and over again is specifically cafe finances, roastery finances, all these different things related to finance, but unlike the coffee ones, so the coffee questions tend to be really specific because they're from people who are, I can only assume are coffee geeks, baristas, roasters, etc. But then the finance ones, even though there's probably an outsized percentage of those, they're all really vague.
Yeah.
I think because
Perfect.
it's not it's
Way
not
easier to talk about.
it's not an
super vague
area that people
question.
have a bunch of expertise in, so we have a lot of I really found the chats with Charles to be valuable on the topic of managing cafe businesses. There are so many resources, but nothing that gives insight into structuring a company and positioning it for profitability inside the industry. So things like that, or these big, broad, sweeping financial questions. Yeah, so if we were looking at starting a coffee shop or running a coffee shop, how are you framing like the key financial metrics of running that coffee shop? I know that's a big open door for you to walk through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like to start at the beginning.
Let's start at the beginning. Jumping ahead to the end, and then temporarily be returning
Hanging out
back
in
to
the
the
middle.
beginning. Some non-linear storytelling.
Yeah, right. I mean, the very first thing I would think about is how the lease and the terms of the lease are going to impact the financials of the company once you open, right? So, like, not even thinking about the cafe yet. It's like thinking about how the terms of the lease are going to impact the cafe. Because again, that's like one of the biggest commitments you're going to make. It's really hard to get out of, almost impossible.
Almost impossible. We know from firsthand experience.
Yeah.
Paying on a lease that we couldn't.
That we didn't build out.
How much money did we spend on that? This is a minor sidebar. So we had signed a lease in Los Gatos, and it wasn't the right time, and there were some things that we didn't have all our boxes checked, so we had to. What did we subletted it?
Yeah.
Essentially, but we ate how much
Well,
money?
we probably signed the lease in 2020. What, like January? No, 2021. Sorry, right? 2021.
That sounds about right.
2021. And no, we wouldn't have done it that soon after the
It
pandemic.
was
Let's
after
call
the
it-
pandemic had
Yeah,
kind of
let's call
calmed
it
down.
2022, January 2022. So that's all of 2022, 12 months of 2023, and then essentially 12 months. So 36. We probably ate 36 months of rent at like $7,000. Yeah, around $250,000.
Just $250,000.
Yeah, I think I've only made had to eat like a bigger chunk of like making like a Wall Street trading mistake.
Nice, dude.
I think I lost like $700,000 one day.
No sweat.
For the fun. No, it was a big deal.
What was your punishment for that?
There was like a yelling barrage. I got berated for like a solid 10 minutes in my boss's office. But,
Awesome.
But I mean, again, there's the ups and downs. It's like you make $1 million a couple of days later and all is forgiven.
Dang.
Here, yeah, here it's a different story for kind of eating $250,000 over the course of 3 years I mean, it's a mistake because it didn't happen, I guess, but it was the best decision at the time. It's sublet now, but again, that's still a costly mistake.
Yeah. So when if you're looking at setting up a lease, I know one of the things we're looking at is terms. So I'm gonna go on my knowledge, and then you correct me if I'm wrong
Sure.
on this one. So And as far as making an investment to the space, pouring a certain amount of money in the space to make it be what we need it to be and getting a return on that, we're usually looking at 15 years total. Like we'd like to get a 5 with 2 5s or a 10 and a 5.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, now, right, 5s, right? I mean, that's again another, like, that'd be like the lower risk is to have like a 5 and 3 5s, right? If you could get to 20 years, but only really be on the hook for the first 5 if it doesn't work out for some reason.
Right.
Right. We were fortunate in Loscato space that it was a 5 and two or 3 5 options.
Right. Because if we had signed a 10 up front, then we'd be just eating the 10.
Yeah. Well, we'd just be we'd be the sublessor for a longer amount of time.
Still a pain in the butt for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Prefer not.
Because anything less than, let's say you're going to stay in business and you're going to make it, right? Anything less than 15 years, it's just not worth it to dump all of that money into the space to not realize the value of that investment.
Yeah, if you're going to pour $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 into a space, have a loan that you're paying off, it's like you really want those years after the loan to really, where you're really having like a higher ROI because you're not paying in any like you're not paying in any interest or like any part of the loan back. Principal. You're not paying any of the interest to the principal back. So
right. And then so our first space was small relatively, which felt nice to manage at the time. It felt relatively simple and still feels nice to manage, honestly. When you hear about the leaders running that store, it just seems cool. So without being involved in the day-to-day of your world, if I was doing it again, I would say that smaller square footage is a nice way to go for a jump off.
No, that was going to be my second one, right? So first is the lease, right? You're looking at term. You're looking at what are the percent increase, like the rent increases per year, and obviously like what, making sure you're paying a fair like dollar per square foot for the space that you have, right? Just making sure that the terms of the lease are good, and just that your vision is aligned with a landlord that wants you to be there forever. Because obviously it's like if you're starting this business, it's like you probably want to be there more than 20 years.
Right.
And 10, 15, 20 years. And you want to make sure that your landlord really wants you to be there and isn't like, all right, 10 years and then we're bored with a coffee shop and we want to do like a wine bar or something, and then you're out. So that part is really underrated, as well as like having an aligned vision with your landlord.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because let's say you do get those 15 years in a 3 and 2 5s, and you do realize X amount of return on investment. Still, at the end of those 15 years, you don't want to just go out of business because you have to start completely over somewhere else.
Yep.
And that's
just even to dig a little bit deeper is like in between those 15 years, if you want to grow and expand, a lot of lenders or people investing are going to want to know the length of all the leases that you have remaining. So, right, it's like, so if you've built a successful company through 10 years, but you only have 5 more years on that lease, that's going to impact you taking out a loan or raising money, because people are going to ask you, cool, like how many years left do you have on their Cafe X lease? And you're going to be like 5 years, and that's not awesome to hear from the bank or from like an investor's perspective.
Right. And then at our size, it's been interesting. So one of your big jobs is keeping up on all of the leases. So we've got 4 locations, and then you could say 5 with the roastery. So we've got this retail-based company right now, and to keep the value of that retail-based company high, even though we don't have any plans on doing anything with it, it's just the value of a retail-based company is directly related to the length of its leases.
Yep.
There's a direct correlation, which is, I'm just re-saying what you just said.
Yep.
Because like it just feels more compounded. Like if we had all 4 of our locations and the leases on all of those were going to expire in 2 years, we essentially have nothing.
Yeah. That's, I mean, the value of your business is, if you have successful cafes, the value of your business is in the length of your leases.
Yeah. And
so it's really important just to make sure you're on like a regular schedule of like communication with your landlord and re-upping, making the time to re-up those leases to lengthen them out over time.
Yeah. Cause starting over, oh man, it's just,
Yeah, you don't want to
You
take
don't
out a loan and build out a store and the capex involved to then have that roll off and you not really get any value out of it at the end.
Right. So being intentional about your lease structure, being intentional about the communication with your landlord, just all your ducks in a row before you even make the first little plunge into running a cafe.
Exactly. And then the second part goes to what you were just talking about with Portola, where the build out structure of your cafe is also going to affect your financials down the road. It's like, I would love all of our cafes to have like our Portola cafe like bar structure. It creates like a really efficient labor model
100%.
to run that cafe. Whereas which granted we did try to do that in Aptos, but there were some building specific and like health department specific issues that came up through the process that didn't allow us to do that we didn't have an experience foreseeing at the time.
So one of the things that we'd been bullish on since the beginning is smallest possible area behind the bar.
Yep.
Because it makes workflow so much simpler. You can do more with less people and you can really control the energy back there better. Yep. But one of the things we ran into with Aptos specifically, and now it looked kind of any other bigger store, is that the given square footage of your store, each individual use inside of that store. So there's the guest area, there's the area behind the bar, there's the restrooms. All of these things are interlocked because there's a certain parking load associated with guest space. There's a certain parking load associated with workspace. So in Aptos, if we wanted to make the bar as small as we wanted it to be, all of a sudden we don't have enough parking.
Right, because the guest area requires more parking,
a heavier parking load
behind the bar area.
Right. So basically, we had to make the bar larger than we wanted to just to be able to permit the space and move forward. So now we have an inefficient. It's far less efficient than it could be.
Yeah.
It's kind of an awkwardly large bar where people, and that one's even weirder because there's these strange beams that come down from the ceiling.
Yeah, they're structural.
So we kind of had to build across and around these structural beams. So we've got this weird horseshoe bar in an area that doesn't really need a horseshoe bar.
Right.
There's a lot of dead space.
And it's just, that impacts us labor-wise every day, every day that the cafe runs, right? It's like we can't run as efficient of a labor structure and have the same experience that we can at Portola.
Yeah. Just Portola is so cool because those small cafes, not just the area behind the bar being efficient, but when you're behind the bar, you can interact with the person who's the furthest away from you in the cafe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can point at and have a quick little exchange with someone who's sitting on that very back wall over by where the old roastery was in a way that you could never do that at Swift. The furthest person away from you is just like way across this big room, and it just creates this cool energy that's nice and easy to manage. And then to tag along with that, for our first store, the smaller your space, the lower dollar your total cost of build out's going to be, just because you have less crap to put in there.
Yeah, because that total space was like 1,100 square feet. Probably a couple hundred of it was where we were roasting in the beginning. So that's maybe and then there's a back room area now. There's probably 800 square feet,
something like that,
of actual bar plus guest space.
I remember the total building was listed at, I thought it was 13, but I could be wrong. But there's the garage space, storage space. It's tiny. Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah. It's just very, compact. So I think those are like the first two things, right? It's like one is the lease and how all those factors are going to impact you 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And then looking at like your build out structure, how that's going to affect labor, how it's going to affect other kind of financial, mainly labor in terms of how efficient your bar can run. But again, those decisions that you make up front are going to impact you 5, 10, 15 years later as well. So I think those are like the first two main things to think about even before the cafe opens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then let's rewind. So we're at Portola 2016. We have a good handle on all those because we have you in our corner. We got essentially the lease that we wanted. We have a nice small space. We spent a few $100,000 on the build out. And then we have a team of probably 8 people. when we opened.
Yep.
What are the main metrics that you are looking at in terms of, okay, what do we need to make this viable to get through the, that first year, second year, third year? I mean, I guess the metric, your targets don't really change depending on what year it is, but it just kind of felt like for me, I'm like, okay, we got to make this thing work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, and again, there is a very defined cafe business model that works. Having worked at a coffee company before we started our own, it's like, we could see that the company that we were at ran a model that worked, and right, it's like, again, it's like, I think, and what I think I did like a SCA presentation a little bit on this in like 2018. Was that
17 or 18?
17 or 18.
Yeah.
But there's a very defined like coffee shop cafe model that's, as long as your daily average, you need a certain amount of scale where your daily average is over like $2,000 plus. But with your daily average there, right, you run like a 60% plus gross margin with maybe say like 25% labor that's kind of like the high end, and you should be able to hit like a 10% plus net margin. Like that includes, so for us, it's the cafe is buying the coffee at wholesale price in the cost of goods, and using that, like we're not like, that's not selling the coffee at cost, like say like Starbucks does. It's like if you're a roaster and you're going to sell the coffee at cost to the cafes, then you should be doing like a 20% plus bottom line. Right.
And people do that. It seems pretty common. I've heard of a lot of people doing it in workplaces where they did that. And the reason for doing that is it makes the cafe financials look so much better.
Right. Yeah. If you're trying to like market your company or grow your company based on how the cafe financials look, then yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
And then for us, we don't do it like that because we've always thought, okay, these cafes are essentially individual business entities. We want to make sure that they can generate revenue on their own without any back-end shenanigans.
Yeah, just without any like subsidizing. And as well, it's like they're great. Then it's like great examples that we can show and talk with our wholesale partners about, hey, this is kind of like what your model could look like. And I think it's been really helpful for people we work with to see it that way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, I mean, again, because with any cafe, it's right. I mean, I think for us, in terms of growing revenue, right, it's really based on the experience in the cafe. It's based on the experience guests have when they come in, the hospitality they receive, the quality of the products they receive, right? It's like, that's, I think, in a big part, what's going to drive people to come back in an industry where you really want or need people to come back every day. It's like, how can you make this their neighborhood cafe? And I think that's what we've always focused on, our cafe locations in neighborhood spots where we can be, we can create that feeling for them that we're their go-to neighborhood cafe.
Right.
So it's like, that's what we've seen over time, is like, that's what's built, daily averages, right? The daily average, again, is just the combination of the number of tickets times like your average ticket. So, right, if you want to dig in to like the daily average number, it's like, cool, how are we helping to increase the number of people who are coming through the doors, which again, I go back to like the experience that guests have. And then with the average ticket, it is like, what are our food offerings that we can make in an efficient way? What are like our pastry offerings, and how can we achieve what's like a sustainable average ticket for ourselves and our guests that doesn't, feel too high or too low.
What's your sweet spot here? What's the Chuck sweet? Let's use Portola as an example, because I think it's a cafe that is similar size to a lot of people listening to this. It's not a gigantic. Swift is its own beast. It feels like.
Yeah.
It's part kitchen, part cafe.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, so again, we were thinking about how do we grow the sales at Portola a couple of years ago, and I'd say like coming out of the pandemic, I mean, I'd say normal operations, our average ticket was probably around $10, which again here in Santa Cruz, this is going to be different across different parts of the country as well, and what's kind of normalized for like a cup of coffee plus a pastry or a food item.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to do comps. So I was talking to Melanie, who owns the Wandering Cup there in North Carolina, and their cost of living seems to be lower. Their minimum wage is a lot lower, but she's like, "Oh, our prices aren't that different."
Okay. Hey,
which was really interesting.
All the better for them,
Yeah.
But here it's like, I'd say we were probably at around like a $10, which you can kind of break down as like a cost of a latte plus a pastry.
Right. That's some sort of latte, maybe with something extra in there and a snack. Yeah.
Yeah, because over time it's like that's generally what you're selling the most of for drink, and the most of for food is like, or at least just for us, right? What we sell is like the most common item is a latte, the most common drink is a latte, the most common food is a pastry item, right? That's gonna be around $10. But we kind of made we were kind of brainstorming how do we provide more food for the guests and something that could raise our average ticket, and that's where we now have kind of a grab and go burrito that we launched. What would you say, like 2023?
Been going
probably
for at
the
least
beginning
a year and a half.
Yeah, the
I feel
beginning
like.
of 2020, into 2022, beginning of 2023, and so our average tickets are now up more in like the $12 range.
And the grab and go burrito, those are all made at our Swift Street kitchen in a commissary and then shipped to each of the cafes. And they have those, I guess they're Turbo Chef ovens that somehow magically heat things up it feels like from the inside out. And they're so ridiculously hot, and I love it. It feels so good. What do we sell those to the other cafes for? How are those priced?
Yeah, totally. So we kind of try to run the commissary break even. So I think the cost of the burritos is around $5.60, and they're sold for around like $11 each.
They're so good. Good morning, Johnson.
And that kind of goes in line with, we're really trying to get like a 50% margin, right? Again, as we dig into each of the items, right? We're trying to get like a 50% margin on any kind of pastry or food that we sell, and trying, and that's not always easy. And it's like we've talked and had conversations with different pastry providers and different food providers, and where we can have like beneficial mutual relationships, and people who are able to say like provide us different. So like the pastry provider, right? It's like, we ideally want to work with someone who, as like their costs go up, it's like we can switch out menu items. We can, that they're willing to like make specific menu items for us. Like, we're really trying to size pastries appropriately so that we're maintaining that 50% margin versus, I know a lot of coffee shop owners that are kind of at the mercy of what their pastry provider provides, and the pastry provider is like, hey, like, because I'll just back up a step, because we're in a business as a coffee company where there's a lot of like costs that we can't control, right? We can't control the cost of coffee on the green level. We can't control the cost of, from pastries. Like, we can't control the cost of wheat. We can't control the cost of eggs if we're selling burritos.
Right.
There's a lot of cost inputs that we can't control. So on the pastry side, working with a partner who like understands that for us, and who wants to engage in the type of relationship where they're willing to work with us and change out ingredients and just adjust offerings so that we can maintain that margin, that's really important for us to hit our goals.
Right. And one of the things that we've been working with Manresa Bread is Herman took the lead on the project, and he's basically able to create a menu from scratch.
Yeah.
So we're able to fill our cases with things that will delight our guests and also meet that margin, and them being able to do that is a huge plus for our business.
Yeah, and it's like, and I don't think it's just because it's the size we are. I think everyone out there, I would hope, could be able to find like a similarly sized pastry provider or food provider who you're kind of in it together, as you both grow, you both benefit. And So it's kind of, that's what I'm always looking for, are providers who are maybe similar size to us, like where we're important to each other and where we understand each other's goals and challenges, and like we're willing to like work together to make it win for everybody. That's really what we're like searching for, and it's not always easy, right? There's work in that, but it's like that's what we need to manage our business in the best way possible.
That's a really good point. There's just some sort of empathy that comes along with being in that similar.
Yeah, it's like I don't necessarily want to be work with like a huge company where we're the small company and then we're not really going to get the attention that we want.
We've even seen that with our banks and stuff like that. It's like finding the right partners to do our SBA loans and our banking partners. It's like, hey, because some of the banks we were working with got bought by bigger banks and all of a sudden we were kind of the shining star, and now we're just, whoops, like an afterthought, and that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, 100%. It's like I encourage people to look at that across their businesses, to find those relationships where they're like mutually beneficial for both of you, because I think it's really important to put in the work to find those, and that you'll really benefit from having those kinds of partners.
Right. Okay, so we've got our lease, we've got the size of our building, we've got our daily average and our ticket count. These are daily average and ticket count are the things that seem to come up the most when we're looking at our P&Ls. And then just to reframe what you're saying, it's like that ticket count is basically a reflection of the service and the experience that you give, like delighting the guests that come in. They tell their friends you have this neighborhood spot. It's like that's where all of our local marketing comes from. It's just like, you have to go to this place. They're incredible. They make me feel so good. The coffee's delicious.
Yeah, and I think part of that is finding some way. It's like we're not like we don't compete on, there's different ways people compete, right? There's low cost providers. There's, we're more on like the higher value, mission, vision driven brand that people can connect with, and then come in and have the hospitality and the experience that helps them feel connected to the community and the neighborhood, right?
Yeah, which if you're listening to this and if you're a shop like ours, I almost feel like that's the only way to do it. Like, this seems like a really hard business to be in if you're in the game of competing on price, because it just feels like a race to the bottom. It feels like you're going to, if you're really passionate about coffee and hospitality but feel the need to compete on price, over time you're going to gather a guest base that doesn't really reflect the kind of people that you probably want to serve.
Yeah, and
you're going to commoditize your business, so to speak.
And because that is a hard part of, like, people ask, like, how do you drive revenue in a cafe situation, right? It's like, it's different, right? Wholesale, it's like, hey, we can make connections with people, we can reach out to people, we can market in certain ways that bring in wholesale leads. But you really, from a cafe perspective, you have to try to figure out, like, what are the ways that I'm going to market to try to bring people into the cafe. And I feel like for us, it's been, obviously the podcast has been a big part of things, but
although not locally so much.
Yeah, maybe not locally so much. I mean, I'd say for a lot of people, it's events in the community, right? Just letting people know that you're there, and just what can you do to bring them in for that first time. And then that's really where you've got to kind of, put on the show and, like, show them what you're about and be able to communicate about your mission and your vision and your values, what kind of brand you are, what kind of service you provide, and really wow people, right? Because you usually get one chance.
Yeah. So I remember when we were opening, we had done a series of events, some of them local, some Greater Bay Area, where it's just all of our energy goes into this 3-hour window of just making people feel awesome. You remember when we did that one? It was
San Francisco.
Well, we did that San Francisco one. That was the first one ever, which was super fun, that Jenny's aunt set up for us. And then the first one we did here, remember, I don't think Jared was there. Maybe it was you and me. We were at, it was some sort of boardwalk thing.
Yeah.
You remember that?
I remember the guy. Some guy had like a parrot.
Yeah, he was walking around with a parrot. Classic Santa Cruz. And nobody knew who we were.
Yep.
And we're just trying our best to just make people as happy as possible.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have like some weird little espresso machine and brewed coffee, and it's all about the energy from the people at that point. And then when we had our pop-ups, so Companion Bake Shop allowed us to do this pop-up on Mondays, and they're closed on Mondays. This is in the West Side, not too far from where we're sitting right now. And it was the same thing. It's just like, market as much as you can, tell as many people as you can, and then once people decide to come in the door, just blow their minds.
Yeah.
And I think I hear people talk about marketing a lot, and they're missing the blowing people's minds in person aspect of it. It's really enticing to focus only on digital or only on Instagram or only on Facebook or only on newsletter and all of these things and feel like, oh, I'm doing all that. That's quote unquote marketing. But then when people come into the cafe, like if every detail's not attended to, like that's the bread and butter of your retail business. It's like the person that's in front of you is the most important person in the world.
Yeah.
Like what can you do to delight them, entertain them, blow their mind with the service, the atmosphere, the product, the whole kit, so that they have no other like option but to say, oh my gosh, like, call up your friends, be like, dude, you got to go to this place. You got to, and I hear it, and it's like I was working out at Natural Bridges. It's this beach pretty close to where our cafe is, and you walk down this big sand hill to where the beach is. So I got my weights, and I'm like doing farmer's carries up the hill and down the hill, and I hear these people talking. They're like, you ever go to Cat and Cloud? We got to go to Cat and Cloud for the burrito. What's that? And it's like people from in town telling people from out of town, and I hear it all over town, and I freaking love it. Like word of mouth is killer for a retail business. Like,
Yeah,
you can't sleep on your guests.
No, and just that in-person connection. It's like there's a lot of digital connection that people have today, but it's like that in-person connection in the cafe, around your cafe, that's gonna bring people back, in my opinion.
It's priceless. You can't not have it and expect people to part with their hard-earned money. It's especially if you have the digital stuff. That's where I get super mad. It's so frustrating to me to see. So I see marketing as a whole, like marketing is essentially this promise that you're making. It's a promise you're making about your brand, who you are, what you do, how you're going to treat people, and how you maneuver through this community. And then all of the digital assets should reflect the in-person experience and vice versa. Like any little slice should be a representation of the whole. But it's so easy to do quote unquote good marketing online. Like everybody has pretty pictures, everybody can post a smiling person, that I feel almost catfished so many times when I go to businesses to where it's like I see this beautiful thing with beautiful people who look really happy to be there on their Instagram feed, and then you go in and it's dull. The people don't look excited. The service is a bummer. And I'm just like, you're lying to me. Like, stop lying to me. I would rather have you tell me the truth and say, hey, we're kind of grumpy here, and like we don't really give a shit. And at least I know what to expect. Because
that's like the last thing you want to do is high expectations and then missed expectations.
Yeah, because the shelf life on that is just getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to have that in-person experience dialed in.
Yep. And so it's like, I feel like that when you're kind of, again, bringing it back to the business, right? It's like, that's that revenue part. And, you know, and it's likely going to take some time to build that, right? From starting a new cafe and like people starting to come in, it's going to take some time to grow those number of people coming in the door. So it's like, that's where kind of having your business model and making sure that you're kind of right sized and that the business model works at, say, right, give yourself the 3 to 6 months, but it's like from 3 to 6 months in, it's like you need to be like, your business model needs to be to where you're break even plus, and like you're managing everything well, and that you're able to leverage any new growth, through that business model that you have to keep improving it and growing it.
How do you think about upping expenses? So as we grow, as you know, all of our cafes do really well, average ticket's solid, guest count keeps going up. How are you managing adding new expenses versus just putting extra money to the bottom line? Because it's so enticing to be, ooh, if I just had this assistant here, ooh, if we just threw one more person at this thing, like what, or maybe there's a better way to ask the question. what kind of extra crap do you need if you're running one cafe, you know?
I mean, I think if you're running one cafe, that you as the owner operator are going to be doing a lot. Just like when we were running one cafe, all of you, me, Chris, and Jared, me, you, and Jared were all in some aspect touching the cafe. And I really think it's when we looked at what growth would look like, it's more of like you're more like forecasting what you need and then backing into how much growth you need to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing is you can only do that if you have a solid business model that works, right? It's because any forecast you ever make in business is only going to be as good as the assumptions that you put into it. So putting rosy, perhaps unrealistic assumptions into a model and then trying to forecast out what, at 2 cafes, at 3 cafes, it's like you want to be really conservative. You want to have good data. You want to use good data when you're creating forecasts and making good assumptions, with the best information you have, so that from one cafe, so I mean, what we did, right, is like, we're like, cool, like, how many cafes do we need to get to before we're able to kind of pull ourselves out of the cafes and work on other things, to create a salary or a livelihood for us and the people that work with us. And so that was like looking, okay, cool, here's what it looks like at 2 cafes. Here's what the company looks like at 3 cafes. Here's what the company looks like at 4 cafes. And also thinking about like what you like, are we going to need additional, what additional people are we going to need, and what roles are we going to play within that new structure? So it's like your structure may change from 1 cafe to 2 cafes, to 3 cafes. I mean, Jared essentially managed the cafes until we got to 4 cafes, and then we were able to, have enough resources to have Herman as the head of retail, right? So. But for us, it was looking at like, here's maybe like the salary level or the amount of income or resources that we want to have. And cool, like we have this business model that works. Let's forecast that business model out across a number of cafes or across different wholesale growth scenarios, see what the income, see what the resources look like. And then, and then kind of, like I said, back into what kind of growth you need to get there.
Right. Yeah, dude.
So I don't know if that's helpful to people. That's like kind of how we looked at it. But again, it all starts with having a business model that works and is reliable.
I think it's really helpful. And I think despite all the specifics that you're giving, one of the key takeaways for me is to so I love when you're around because...
Thanks, man.
Because when you're around, we actually have the data. So I hang around a handful of people who have small businesses or are starting up projects, and a good number of them do things by feel. I just feel like it's going to be good. Like I feel, and there's something to having a gut feeling, but knowing the actual hard numbers, what it's going to take and where you're at, and not projecting this future that's unlikely to exist, makes me feel really comfortable. Even when the picture that we're looking at, let's say going into the pandemic or all these other things that are happening, like minimum wage has gone up every year since we've opened, which doesn't just affect our entry-level workers, it affects the entire organization. So, what was the number we were looking at? It's like minimum wage goes up $1. We're spending $130,000 more dollars as an organization, just to plug all those gaps and make sure everybody goes up in lockstep. So even when things like that roll down the pipe, you don't love to look at it. I feel good knowing we know the score.
Yeah.
And
again, it's like even for everybody that has a company, like if you don't have a specifically financially background person that's part of the ownership group, or that's even on staff, it's like making sure your bookkeeper is giving you good data on whatever cadence you want it, right? It's, we look at all of our stuff monthly, but we also have like weekly score sheets, right? We have weekly reporting coming out of the cafes. We have weekly reporting. We've done better recently, but like getting to weekly reporting in all of our departments to make sure we're on track and hitting the numbers that we want to be hitting. And then if we're not, it's like, great, like let's know that sooner than later so we can see who needs support, or see where we've kind of gone off track a little bit, and we can kind of course correct. So really, for us, it's really important to have that, just like you're saying, to have that data, and to even if you don't have someone financially in-house, to find some way to get the reporting. And it can be simple Excel sheets, right, that are just, you're pulling data off your POS in terms of like transactions and ticket numbers and payroll percentage, estimated payroll percentages and things like that. Like just even some simple spreadsheets that can give you some of the metrics that you need to just know that things are progressing in the way you want them to be. And then I think everyone should have like a monthly kind of deep dive into what their business looks like. And your bookkeeper, we talk about it again, like as the finance department, we're trying to wrap up all the financials. So February just ended. We're trying to have all of our financials wrapped up and put together by the 15th of the following month. So by March 15th, it's like myself and Mike that works with me in the finance department. It's like we're trying to put together the financials for the leadership team by the 15th of the month, and then we can go over everything with them and try to create like as short of a feedback loop as possible, so that we always have kind of the best data to make decisions with.
Yeah, and if you're an individual owner operator, you'll be looking at those finances yourself. But if you have any kind of leadership team, one of the things we've done is we've always shared those finances with the leadership team, which has been really important, because if you're charged with running a cafe and creating an experience, you need to understand how the things that you do in the cafe affect the P&L of that cafe. You really can't do one without the other. It's just, I can kind of understand why it feels very old school. Like I want to keep all the numbers secret and not share anything, but I feel like you're really handicapping your leadership team by keeping all those things just to yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, I mean, we've seen great success. It's like, I mentioned Mike's really taking it. Mike's sitting over here next to us, so I can look at him while I'm talking about it. But he's done like a really amazing job of like taking those numbers, and it's like, I'm sure for a lot of people listening, it's like our costs are increasing. It's like your costs are increasing, but we still need to manage the business back on track. It's like prices for everything have gone up in the last couple of years, but it's like, we're getting the numbers, and then Mike's meeting with the retail team right now and looking at like, cool, can we change like the mix of the pastries, or how does our pastry waste look? And it's like, especially just in this business, like we have new managers that come in, we have new team leaders, new assistant managers, new coordinators, we have new people coming in. Hopefully our systems are good, but there could always be, there's always times of year where like maybe the waste numbers get a little bit off track for pastries or coffee or things like that. And it's really important to have that feedback loop. And Mike's in there with the meeting being like, cool, like here's what our pastry numbers looked like last month. Like, hey, why don't we try this, and this, to get us back on track. And so every month there's some communication about the numbers or the business aspect of the business to the retail leaders and the retail team in terms of things that they're working on to make sure that we're moving the business in the right direction and always trying to course correct. Because I think it's impossible to be doing perfect all the time, sure. Right? It's like there's limited resources, limited time, right? We got to train people. We're focused on the experience. But just little bits of connection time around goals in all the different parts of the business that are important, in culture and training, in a cafe experience, and also in the business aspect of it. So it's just part of the pie.
Hell yeah. Solid, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Dude, anytime.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, man.
All right, we're out of here.
Hey everyone, that's the podcast for the week. Thanks so much for listening. If you heard something that inspired you, or if you heard something that gave you more questions than answers, send us an email to podcast@catandcloud.com. And if you're looking to know more about us, then head to our website at catandcloud.com, where you can find everything we have to offer. A great place to start would be The Answer, our house coffee that's right for any occasion. Or the Best Friends Blend, a coffee that tastes just as good as the good it does by donating $1 per pound back to our partnering producers. Also, if you're feeling extra friendly, connect with us in the usual places, like YouTube, Instagram, pretty much everywhere that's hip. All right, that's it. Thanks for being awesome, everyone, and we'll be back next week.